It all started with a knock on my front door, not a friendly one of those impatient, aggressive knocks that makes your stomach twist before you even open it. I stepped onto my porch to find Martha, the HOA president, standing there with a clipboard and a smug look on her face. She didn't say hello, she didn't ask how I was doing, she just shoved the clipboard at me and pointed to a red, stamped document. This is your final notice. You owe $70,000 in fines for road repair negligence. Failure to comply will result in further action. I looked down at the paper, trying not to laugh. $70,000 for what? She glared at me like I was some criminal squatting on sacred HOA land. The road is full of potholes, she barked. You've neglected your responsibility, and it's impacting the community. I looked past her shoulder toward the road, the one that ran up to my property, cut through the neighborhood, and ended in a cul-de-sac beyond the HOA sign. I looked back at her and said flatly, "That's not your road, Martha. It's mine." She blinked, once, then again. I could almost hear her gears grinding. "Excuse me," she said, raising an eyebrow like I'd just spoken in code. "That access road belongs to the HOA. It's on our maintenance list." "Actually, it's not," I replied. "I own it. I bought it from the county years ago when they were offloading unused municipal paths. I've got the deed. It's private property." The silence between us stretched thick and tense. No, that can't be," she stammered. "Everyone uses that road. The entire HOA accesses their homes through it." I gave a slow nod. "Yep, and I've never stopped them, because I'm not a petty person. But if you're going to fine me for not fixing a road I let you use for free, we've got a problem." She left without another word, her heels clicking like gunshots on the sidewalk. I watched her walk away, shaking my head. I already knew what would happen next: letters, threats, escalation. They weren't ready to believe what I said, but they would. Within a week, the HOA had called a meeting. They tried to present maps, plats, and half-baked legalese claiming the road fell under community jurisdiction, but they hadn't done their homework. I had. I showed up with a certified copy of the deed, dated and notarized. I laid it on the community center table like it was an ace in a poker game. "You're all driving on land that I own," I said, looking around the room. "I haven't charged anyone a cent. I've never blocked access, but if you keep trying to shake me down, I can legally close the gate, and when I do, no one's getting in or out without a detour that adds 20 minutes to your drive." The room fell dead silent. Some of them looked shocked, others angry. A few neighbors avoided my gaze, but Martha, she just sat there, lips pursed, face pale, trying to swallow the fact that her entire leverage had just crumbled. One of the board members asked, "So, why haven't you brought this up before?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Because I'm not spiteful. I believe in neighbors helping neighbors, but you don't find the guy who's letting you use his road for free." They called for a closed discussion. I left the room and stood outside under the night sky, listening to the muffled debate behind closed doors. I wasn't worried. They couldn't win this fight. I had the law, I had the deed. All they had was arrogance. And the deeper they pushed, the harder they'd fall. That night, something changed in me. I realized this wasn't just about potholes or fines or some cracked stretch of asphalt. It was about control. About how far someone would go to wield power they didn't actually have, and how sometimes the quietest landowners hold the biggest trump cards. I spent the next few days in disbelief, sorting through the fine documents. $70,000, not a warning, not a discussion, just a cold printed threat. I paced my kitchen with the paper in my hand like it was some kind of bad joke, but it wasn't. It was real, and they were serious. The HOA had declared that I was solely responsible for the pothole-riddled road that ran through the neighborhood, a road they claimed was community-owned. They called it neglect, said I was endangering the neighborhood, and slapped me with a bill larger than my entire yearly income. I thought back to the day I first bought this land. There wasn't a single house around, just me and that dirt road winding through my newly purchased plot. When the subdivision popped up around it years later, no one ever asked to buy an easement. No one ever questioned it. They just drove over it like they owned it, and I let it slide. Until now, I pulled out the original property deed and maps, blowing the dust off the folder, and there it was. Clear as daylight, the road was mine, legally, fully, not a shared right-of-way, not a conditional easement, mine, and they had built their dream community all around it, never realizing they'd been using my land to enter and exit their homes. The next HOA meeting was the perfect storm. I showed up uninvited, of course, and laid the deed down on the table. Dead silence. Karen Pemberton, the HOA president, tried to keep her composure, but her face said everything. They had never done the homework, never checked, and now the guy they thought they could crush with $1.70 fine was the same guy who controlled the only road in and out of their entire neighborhood. I looked each board member in the eye and told them plainly, rescind the fine or I shut down the road permanently. I wasn't bluffing. I'd already contacted a contractor to set up a gate at the property line. I had the signs printed, and I had every legal document to back it all up. They panicked. Suddenly, Karen was less smug. The whispers started. The board members exchanged nervous glances, and just like that, the balance of power flipped. I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I was the gatekeeper. The fallout from that HOA meeting sent ripples through the entire community. People who once glared at me from behind their trimmed hedges were now slowing down as they passed, offering weak waves and forced smiles. I could feel the shift, the fear. Word had spread like wildfire. The man with the $1.70 fine, yeah, he owns the road, every inch of it, and he's not bluffing. By the following week, I had crews setting up posts along the entrance. A big sign went up first, private property access by permission only. Then came the concrete footings for the gate. It wasn't just some flimsy chain or wooden bar. No, I ordered a 14-foot black steel security gate with an automatic keypad and camera system. Not because I wanted to keep people out, but because I wanted them to remember they were guests on my land. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She called me 3 times that day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. We need to talk, she said in the first. This isn't helping anyone. In the second, and by the third, she sounded frantic. You're punishing families, children. I didn't respond. They hadn't considered my family when they dropped that outrageous fine in my mailbox. Now they could sit with that feeling. That weekend the road closure became real. I sent out certified letters to every homeowner with the new access policy. They'd need a code granted monthly, and they'd need to sign an agreement acknowledging the road was mine. No signature, no access. Suddenly, the HOA board found themselves scrambling. They had to face every neighbor they once held sway over, explaining how their arrogance had handed control of the main road to the one person they thought they could bully. And it didn't stop there. One homeowner, a retired vet named Mr. Dawson, knocked on my door. He'd lived there since the neighborhood was built. They never told us, he said, never said the road wasn't part of the HOA. I showed him the documents. He nodded and sighed. I figured something shady was going on. Turns out, a lot of residents were just as fed up with the HOA as I was. Soon enough, I had people asking if they could contribute to the gate or offer maintenance help. Some even thanked me, because for the first time, someone stood up to the HOA and won. They weren't used to being questioned. They were used to obedience, to silence. But the gate I was building, it wasn't just steel and bolts. It was a line, a very clear one. The day it was fully installed, I stood back and watched the final piece click into place. The keypad blinked, the camera panned, and the barrier stood tall. Let them come. Let them see what happens when you find the wrong man. The gate had only been up a week when Karen made her next move. Predictably, it wasn't a peaceful one. Early Tuesday morning, I noticed tire tracks near the base of the hill by the maintenance access road. Someone had tried to drive around the gate through the ditch. I checked the cameras. There she was, Karen in her pearl white SUV, creeping along the edge like she was in a spy movie. The only problem: the ditch wasn't dry. We'd had 2 days of rain. Her rear wheels were halfway sunk in mud, spinning uselessly as she floored it. She eventually had to call a tow truck, and I made sure to send a copy of the footage to the entire HOA email list. No commentary, just facts. The embarrassment didn't stop her. At the next board meeting, which she held at the community center instead of her home, she announced plans to formally challenge the gate. Claimed I was disrupting the unity and flow of the neighborhood. One resident asked, "Didn't you approve the fine without notifying him?" She brushed it off, but the cracks were forming. Then came the lawsuit. Filed in the county clerk's office, stamped and everything. The HOA wanted a judge to declare the road as part of common community infrastructure. Their case relied on a blurry map from the 1990s and a vague line in the original developer's brochure. A brochure. My attorney, the same one who helped me buy the land, just laughed when he read it. This is a formality, he said. They don't have a leg to stand on. Still, it meant court and court meant drama, but I didn't shy away. On the day of the hearing, I wore my grandfather's old boots, the same boots he wore when he first surveyed the land. It felt symbolic, like he was still standing with me. Karen showed up with a fancy lawyer in a sharp suit. But suits don't win you land rights. Deeds do, and I had those in spades. When the judge asked for documentation, my lawyer handed over the certified property plat, road maintenance records, and copies of the original purchase agreement. It was airtight. The HOA lawyer tried to argue implied easement. My lawyer countered with explicit ownership. No easement, no mention, no rights. The ruling took 10 minutes. Road ownership belongs solely to the defendant. The judge said, barely looking up from his papers. The HOA has no claim. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. The rest of the board sat silent, and me, I just nodded. It wasn't victory I felt, it was peace. But peace didn't last long. The next day, Karen posted a letter on the HOA board's website claiming I had intimidated the board and manipulated the system. She tried to rally the residents again, make it seem like I was the villain, some rogue neighbor shutting out the community. Only this time it didn't work. Residents responded with comments like maybe we should have read the documents before approving fines. And we stand with him. Even Mr. Dawson replied, "You had your chance to work with him. Now live with the consequences." I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The neighborhood did it for me. The gate stood firm. The lawsuit had failed. And the HOA, it was unraveling bit by bit. Board members started stepping down. Meetings were canceled. Karen remained clinging to control. But her power, it was gone, and all I had to do was own the road. The HOA doubled down on its threats, now delivering notices claiming I owed over $70,000 in escalating fines. Every day, I received letters stamped with red ink violation after violation for potholes, loose gravel, and aesthetic disruption. They even included drone images showing zoomed-in views of my road's surface, citing safety hazards and community standards. But I had something they didn't: leverage. I quietly scheduled a land survey with a private firm, documenting the exact boundaries of my road and confirming once again what the county records already said. Then I had my attorney draft a cease and desist letter. It was simple and powerful. It said, the HOA is trespassing on privately owned land. Further entry or maintenance without permission constitutes criminal trespass. The next HOA board meeting was tense. I didn't attend, but my attorney did. He handed over a folder containing the survey, deed records, and copies of every fine they'd sent me. He also included an invoice charging them retroactive usage fees for every HOA on property that used the road, plus interest. It totaled nearly $500,000. Karen, the HOA president, called it extortion. My attorney calmly replied, "It's not extortion. It's property law. You attempted to bankrupt the legal owner of the land your entire neighborhood relies on. This is restitution." Word spread fast. Residents were horrified. They started asking questions. Why didn't the HOA check the property lines before issuing fines? Why were they antagonizing someone who owned their only access point? At first, the board denied everything, blaming a clerical error. But I wasn't interested in apologies anymore. I wanted justice, and I wanted them to feel just a fraction of the pressure they'd put on me. Within 2 weeks, I filed suit, not just for harassment, but for attempted unlawful enrichment. The same court system the HOA once used to bully others was now summoned against them. The lawsuit hit the HOA like a sledgehammer. Karen and the rest of the board scrambled, hiring expensive attorneys and calling emergency meetings. They tried to portray me as some kind of rogue neighbor out for revenge, but the facts were not on their side. The court filings were airtight, complete with decades-old survey maps, signed title deeds, and correspondence proving their harassment. They weren't just dealing with a disgruntled resident. They were dealing with a landowner who had been wronged, As the case progressed, depositions began. Karen stammered under oath as she tried to explain why the HOA had levied fines for a property it didn't own. She admitted they hadn't verified the road's legal status. When asked if she ever consulted the county registrar, her face went pale. No, she mumbled. Emails surfaced during discovery. In them, Karen wrote things like, "We'll keep fining him until he pays or sells. And it's just a gravel road. Who's gonna fight us over dirt?" Those emails became the nail in the coffin. The judge saw right through the HOA actions. It wasn't about safety or aesthetics. It was about control. Meanwhile, I had a front row seat as the neighborhood's support for the HOA crumbled. Residents began to speak up, some sharing their own story of bullying and overreach. A few even joined my suit as co-plaintiffs, revealing similar attempts by the HOA to fine or threaten them into compliance. My lawyer presented a plan. If the HOA settled, we would drop all back charges except legal fees. But if they refused, we would pursue full damages, including rent for road use, pain and suffering, and public defamation. Karen was defiant. She refused the settlement and insisted on trial. Big mistake. The courtroom was packed the day of opening arguments. The judge, a sharp and seasoned woman who didn't suffer fools, listened carefully. Our side presented a clear narrative of abuse, property rights, and HOA overreach. Their side flailed. When it was all said and done, the ruling was swift and brutal. The HOA was ordered to pay $370,000 in damages. Karen personally was found liable for a portion of the legal fees due to her documented misconduct. The HOA was also forbidden from issuing fines related to property they did not control and was mandated to undergo external oversight for 2 years. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, not revenge, not satisfaction, just peace. I hadn't just defended my land, I'd exposed a corrupt system and set a precedent for every homeowner who ever felt helpless against an HOA with too much power and too little sense. After the trial, things changed fast. The once feared HOA board fell into disarray. Karen, now disgraced and personally fined, resigned under pressure just 2 weeks later. Her allies on the board either quit or were voted out during a heated emergency election held in the community clubhouse. New leadership emerged, people who actually listened, who understood that the HOA was meant to serve the residents, not control them. The new board invited me to their first open meeting. I walked in cautiously, unsure of the tone, but what I found was surprising. Apologies. Honest, public apologies. They acknowledged the overreach, the misuse of power, and the way Karen had turned the HOA into her personal enforcement squad. And then they asked me something I never expected. Would I consider consulting on revising the bylaws? It caught me off guard, but after everything, I didn't want more war. I wanted to make sure this never happened again, so I agreed. Over the next month, I worked closely with the new board. We rewrote the HOA rules from the ground up, clearer language, strict limitations on board authority, and new checks and balances to prevent abuse. Fines required evidence and approval. Property boundaries had to be verified through official records. Transparency was no longer a buzzword, it became policy. The road, my road, was officially removed from the HOA jurisdiction in their records, and new maps were distributed to every homeowner. But the most satisfying part, the sign, that HOA sign they had posted at the road entrance years ago, I personally removed it with the entire community watching. People cheered, some clapped me on the back, others simply nodded in quiet respect. And then something else happened, something unexpected. A family down the road approached me a few days later. They had been struggling with the HOA for years. Petty fines, denied improvement requests, even being harassed about the height of their fence. But now, with the new leadership and the community's eyes wide open, they felt empowered. They invited me over for dinner as a thank you. That evening turned into stories and laughter around their backyard fire pit. It made me realize something bigger. This wasn't just about a court win or a road. It was about a shift in power. People were no longer afraid of the HOA. Neighbors started helping each other instead of reporting one another. The fences between us, both literal and emotional, started coming down, and I finally went back to enjoying my land the way my grandfather intended. Quiet mornings by the lake, evenings watching the sun set over the ridge. My dogs ran free again, And I built a new workshop on the very patch Karen once threatened to fine me over. Some scars remain, of course, legal bills, stress, moments of doubt, but they're part of the story now. A story that ends not with revenge, but with renewal. Because in the end, justice isn't about crushing the enemy. It's about rebuilding something better in its place. Months passed, and peace finally settled over the community like a long-awaited rain. The days were quieter now, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from silence, but from the absence of fear. No more letters on doorsteps, no more threats tucked into mailboxes, no more HOA patrols driving slowly past my property with clipboards in hand. The neighborhood had changed, people waved more. Kids played without being told to keep their voices down. Even the air felt lighter. I spent most of my mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise over the lake. That dam I once opened in defiance. I repaired it properly, reinforced it with new stone and timber, and added a small walking path alongside it. What used to be a symbol of my anger had become a peaceful corner for fishing, reading, and quiet reflection. Strangely enough, the lake never looked more beautiful than it did after everything had settled. One morning, as the mist rose off the water, I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind my barn. I turned to find a young man standing there, new to the neighborhood, early 30s, polite. He introduced himself as Evan, said he'd bought the house 2 doors down. He had heard the story, bits and pieces of it anyway. He wanted to know how things had really gone down, not the gossip, the truth. So I invited him to sit, and I told him everything about Karen, about the barn, about the trial, the valve, the community shift, the fear, the fight, and the slow, hard path to healing. He listened the whole time without interrupting, and when I was done, he asked me one simple question. If you could do it all over again, would you? I paused, staring out at the trees. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then finally, I looked back at him and said, yeah, I would, but not because I enjoyed it. Because someone had to. Evan nodded. He got it. That conversation turned into something more. Over the next few weeks, I met more new neighbors, people who had recently moved in, drawn by the charm of the land and the stories of the community's transformation. They weren't afraid of the HOA anymore, not because the rules were gone, but because they had seen what happens when power is challenged by principle. Eventually, I started keeping a little journal, notes, maps, letters from neighbors, even a few photos of that courtroom day. I didn't do it for fame. I did it so the next person who faced injustice here would know they weren't alone. By the year's end, the community had started something new, a neighborhood gathering every fall, not HOA-sponsored, just people, potlucks, bonfires, music, and storytelling. And every year, someone would nudge me forward and ask me to share the story. I always resisted, but eventually I'd give in, because stories matter. They remind people that standing up, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, is worth it. That barn they tore down, I rebuilt it, stronger, wiser, and this time it wasn't just for tools and wood. It became a place for gathering, a place for community, a reminder that even when something is taken from you, you can build back, taller, better, stronger. Because sometimes when they try to destroy your foundation, they forget one thing. You still own the land it was built on. The next HOA board meeting was filled with tension. Karen had somehow managed to convince a few other board members to back her up again despite the cease and desist notice. She claimed that my road was public property and that I was bluffing with my ownership. I walked into the meeting uninvited, carrying a stack of documents, surveys, aerial maps, legal filings, and finally, a notarized copy of the deed. The room fell silent. One by one, I laid out the papers on the table, explaining how the road had never been transferred to the city or county and remained in my family's name. There was no legal avenue for the HOA to control it. A lawyer they'd hired tried to counter me, but when I cited case law and county zoning regulations, he had to sit back and admit I was right. Karen looked like she wanted to scream, but that wasn't even the climax. I ended my presentation with a letter from my own attorney, notifying the HOA that I was formally revoking access to the road for any purpose other than utility maintenance, unless a fair easement agreement was reached with backdated compensation for prior use. The board began to murmur. Homeowners in the audience gasped. The reality of the situation finally set in. Without my road, they were boxed in. No alternate route, no legal claim. Karen's leadership crumbled right there in that room. People started yelling at her, questioning her motives, demanding a vote to remove her from the board. She stood up to defend herself but was met with boos. The HOA president's gavel came down with a bang, but it was too late. The rebellion had begun. Within a week, Karen was removed from the HOA board in a special vote. Homeowners who once followed her blindly were now furious, realizing she had risked their access, safety, and property values out of personal spite. The new board reached out to me almost immediately, this time with humility and desperation in their tone. They wanted to negotiate an easement agreement. I wasn't unreasonable. I didn't want to make their lives harder, just fair. I proposed a long-term easement deal that included monthly compensation, funded not through absurd fines or harassment but through standard HOA dues. In return, I would allow unrestricted use of the road and even help coordinate proper maintenance. They accepted. The legal paperwork was signed, and the entire community now knew who really held the cards. As for the $70,000 fine they had tried to impose, it was dismissed as unenforceable, a fantasy punishment created by Karen's personal vendetta. I made sure that record was scrubbed clean. Karen, now without her power, moved out a month later. Rumor has it, she couldn't stand the humiliation of facing the people she once ruled over. And me, I still live here, same house, same land, same road. Only now, every time someone drives over that pavement, they know exactly whose property they're crossing. Sometimes I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, and watch them pass, not out of spite. Just as a reminder, you can stand your ground, you can fight back, and when you do it smart and legal, even the loudest tyrants eventually go silent.